Well, hello there, and again, welcome to another session here on Biblical News Updates and Commentary. Good to have all of you with us once again. You know, I'll tell you what, and I think all of you would agree with me, that we've just gone through a historical election cycle. I thought 2016 was probably the most intense election cycle that I ever experienced in my lifetime until I came up on this most recent one in 2020. The intensity, the controversy, the suspicion surrounding the results of the election that we've just all gone through is just stunning, amazing. I mean, it's just right now even highly questionable about how all this is going to play out, because there are still lawsuits working their way through the courts as we go to tape this particular program. And this election cycle was quite different for a lot of reasons, which none the least was the fact of the stunning executive orders that are now being written and implemented by this young administration that has just gotten into office, and over the last couple of weeks to month or so have been deploying executive order after executive order after executive order. Now, I want to get back to that here later on in the presentation, but I want to interrupt myself first to mention that we've been getting some comments back into us mentioning how, well, you know, we probably should back off a little bit on talking about geopolitical subjects, issues, current events, and or even policies, governmental policies. And really, you know, Christians ought not to be entangled with all of that because, well, it just doesn't really apply to us in our day-to-day lives. And frankly, a lot of that information is just not real applicable and practical, and people would like to hear perhaps more about Christian living and so on. And I get that. I understand that. But in all due respect, when I'm thinking about that, I got to ask myself the question. I mean, the Bible is 1/3 prophecy. That's a lot of material. And there's a lot of rich books that are dealing with prophetic scenarios, events, and details. And I think of chapters like Daniel 7 that goes through a whole array of beasts, things that essentially lay out certain historical benchmarks, markers that are important, obviously, because there they are. They're written in the book of Daniel. The whole book of Revelation, 22 chapters that are just loaded, chock full of all kinds of information, my friends, about this thing called a beast and how it's going to rise in the end times. And from A to Z goes through scenarios of events through those 22 chapters that are, quite frankly, outlining a lot of evil and information that, well, God obviously wanted us to be aware of. Or why would He have made comments to John, for instance, to make sure you write it down? And not only do you write it down, but that you write it down in the past, the present, and the future. I mean, He was specific in many respects with regards to what He wanted written. So it's hard for me in realizing sometimes and comprehending why some would say, well, this is unimportant, that it really should be dismissed. I mean, you know, you don't need to talk to these points because, quite frankly, it's just not that important. And I'm amazed at this, my friends. I'm amazed that people would think along these lines and undermine God. And I say that because in so thinking this, I believe, fail to realize the amount of effort and work that God went through, quite frankly, to make this information available to us. I think of Daniel chapter 10. I mean, here you have an angel, I think it was probably Gabriel, who attempted to try to get to Daniel, but it took him 21 days. 21 days. Read the story there, Daniel 10. I'm not going to turn to it for the sake of time here, but the fact is that God invested a lot of time and effort. Matter of fact, He even sent Michael to help this angel to get through the angel of Persia who was holding him back and restraining him from breaking the veil and finally making it to Daniel, who the prayer was intended to be answered from day one, we find out in that chapter. And of course, as I've already mentioned, John, you can read there in chapter 1, verse about 11 or so, where John himself is told, look, I'm the Alpha, I'm the Omega, write all of this down. And then later on in verses 17 through about 19, we're told there again that Jesus Christ, talking to John, essentially lays it out and emphatically states very clearly, I want you to list the past, I want you to list the present, and I want you to list what you see and hear for the future. So this is important information. And quite frankly, God is very determined that we do come to understand that this information about a coming world-ruling government is understood, especially as we go down into the latter days, my friends. And a lot of what we see around us today with the development of the technologies and so forth that we've got, and the usage and familiarity that we even experience certain benefits and conveniences from, I think all of us would agree that there are certain markers that now have been met that certainly give us the impression that we are on a track, we are on a trend that does not in the future end well. And your Bible is full of instructions with regards to letting us know that it is important for us as church members to be aware of some of these things. Over here in the book of Proverbs and in chapter 24, we read something that I think is very instructive for all of us who know these things in the Bible, especially about the latter days, and the fact that 1/3 of the Bible is indeed prophecy. That's, as I said, a lot of material that God has devoted for us to be able to absorb and become familiar with, and shame on us if we don't take the time to understand some of that, because that's a lot of material to ignore, to minimize, marginalize, or dismiss. So here, rightly so, the writer of Proverbs says this. He says, if you forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death, and what that means, that forbear means if you hinder, if you hold back, if you restrain yourself from warning somebody. For instance, a neighbor, the house is burning, you know your neighbor is in the house, and for you not to run up the steps onto the front porch, break down the door and hammer on the door or whatever and tell them the house is burning, get up, get up, get up, get out of the house and so forth. Not to do that is shameful. It goes back to what James talked about in regards to chapter 4 there, verse about 17, that for he who knows to do good and does not do it, that's a sin. That is a sin. Here, back to Proverbs 24 and verse 11, we read here that if you forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death, and we read here, drawn unto death, and them that are ready to be slain, if you say, behold, we know it not, does not that ponder the heart? Does not he that ponders the heart consider it? Meaning God. For you to know, to do better, and not to do it, and forewarn, to restrain yourself when you know that you should say something. My friends, shame on us if we don't say something and warn those that need warning. Ezekiel chapter 33 is a whole chapter about the responsibility of a watchman on the wall, telling the people of the land, of the city, wherever they may be, that when in fact an enemy is approaching, that they, that is the watchman, should say something to forewarn the people so they can prepare emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, in preparation of the approaching evil and or threat that is coming. And if not, for those who know and don't say anything, well then the people's blood, it says there in Ezekiel 33, is on that person who knew better and didn't do it and is guilty of the sin of omission. And this is a very serious thing to find yourself falling into the grips of, if indeed you would allow it. As I said, the Bible is 1/3 prophecy. 1/3, 33 and a third % of the whole book, of this whole book. And that's a lot of pages here. To be ignored, not to be addressed, not to use for information and be informed of things that are coming down when in fact they are, so that you could recognize it and be alerted to it. I think, my friends, we all would see and understand that it can be very valuable to us to know what is coming down before it comes down, so that when it does come down, we're not only prepared, but we can recognize the fact that it is indeed from God. You know, I have a letter here, an open letter, from a gentleman named Carlo Vagano. He's an archbishop, Catholic archbishop. He wrote this letter to then President Donald Trump back in October of last year, 2020. He has a unique perspective, this man, well-traveled, well-educated, and felt he needed to explain this perspective to the President of the United States at that time in October of 2020. Due to the observations, concerns, and quite frankly, worrisome thoughts about what was going on, that he could not restrain himself, he could not forbear in telling the President of the United States what he needed to prepare for and address. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this beast on the move, but framing it in the framework of this open letter that Carlo Vagano, Archbishop Vagano, wrote to then President Donald Trump back in October of 2020. Let me share just some excerpts with you about this letter, because I think it will help you, as it's helped me, to begin to grasp the severity and the realities that we are now involved in, and like it or not, are becoming more and more surrounded by as each day, each month, each year, each decade goes by. Listen to what Carlo Vagano, Archbishop Vagano, has to say. He says, "Dear Mr. President, allow me to address you at this hour in which the fate of the whole world is being threatened by a global conspiracy against God and humanity. I write to you as the Archbishop, as a successor of the apostles, as the former apostolic nuncio to the United States of America. I am writing to you in the midst of the silence of both civil and religious authorities. May you accept these words of mine as the voice of one crying in the desert." John 1:23. And he's referencing himself as a voice in the wilderness, crying out a warning to those that have ears to hear and eyes to see. And he's hoping, quite frankly, that then President Donald Trump would take to heart what he's about to warn him about. And this is, by the way, the second letter that he wrote to then President Donald Trump, because apparently he references the fact that he did write him a previous letter in the month of June. But let's go back and read the letter here. And I'm back now quoting. "As I said when I wrote my letter to you in June, this historical moment sees the forces of evil aligned in a battle without quarter against the forces of good. Forces of evil that appear powerful and organized as they oppose the children of light, who are disoriented and disorganized, abandoned by their temporal and spiritual leaders. Daily, we sense the attacks multiplying of those who want to destroy the very basis of society, the natural family, respect for human life, love of country, freedom of education and business. We see heads of nations and religious leaders pandering to this suicide of Western culture and its Christian soul, while the fundamental rights of citizens and believers are denied in the name of a health emergency that is revealing itself more and more fully as instrumental to the establishment of an inhuman, faceless tyranny. He goes on, a global plan called the Great Reset is underway. Its architect is a global elite that wants to subdue all humanity, imposing coercive measures with which to drastically limit individual freedoms and those of entire populations. In several nations, this plan has already been approved and financed. In others, it is still in the early stage. Behind the world leaders who are the accomplices and executors of this infernal project, there are unscrupulous characters who finance the World Economic Forum and Event 201 promoting their agenda. I go on. Mr. President, I imagine that you are already aware that in some countries the Great Reset will be activated between the end of this year, that's 2020, and the first trimester of 2021. For this purpose, further lockdowns are planned, which will officially justify by a supposed second and third wave of the pandemic. You are well aware of the means that have been deployed to sow panic and legitimate draconian limitations on individual liberties, artfully provoking a worldwide economic crisis. Now, did you hear what he just said? I want to break here for a moment. Because uniquely enough, I don't know whether or not many of you caught this interview by Chuck Todd on CNN. Chuck Todd went ahead and he interviewed a gentleman named Mike Osterholm. He's the director of infectious diseases at the University of Minnesota. Uniquely enough, what Archbishop Vigano just mentioned with regard to a supposed second and third wave in October, this interview by Chuck Todd, conducted this February 1st, some months later, uniquely enough, connects up with Archbishop Vigano's warning. Take a look and listen to this. I'll be right back.
Joining me now is Dr. Michael Osterholm. He's an infectious disease expert at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Osterholm, welcome back to Meet the Press. You know, earlier this week, you and I spoke about this current race against these mutant strains and about the vaccine distribution. And you seem to, you said something that really stuck with me. So I want to show this screen of, this is the efficacy rate of the first doses of the three of the vaccines, Moderna at 80%, Johnson & Johnson 72%, Pfizer at 52%. Again, all the first dose efficacy rates. Do you believe we are now at a point where we may have to call an audible here on how we distribute the vaccine?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I have been one of those saying that we need to make sure that we have both first and second doses and follow the FDA approval process. But let me say right now, we do have to call an audible. I think it's no doubt about it. The fact is that the surge that is likely to occur with this new variant from England is going to happen in the next 6 to 14 weeks. And if we see that happen, which my 45 years in the trenches tell us we will, we are going to see something like we have not seen yet in this country. England, for example, is hospitalizing twice as many people as we ever hospitalized at our highest number. And so we do know that if we look at these first doses, that in fact we can even get higher numbers than you just laid out by the time of the third week after vaccination. So we still want to get 2 doses in everyone, but I think right now in advance of this surge, we need to get as many 1 doses in as many people over 65 as we possibly can to reduce the serious illness and deaths that are going to occur over the weeks ahead. Well, I think it's going to be tough. I mean, imagine where we're at, Chuck, right now. You and I are sitting on this beach where it's 70 degrees, perfectly blue skies, gentle breeze, but I see that Hurricane 5, Category 5 or higher, 450 miles offshore. And, telling people to evacuate on that nice blue sky day is going to be hard. But I can also tell you that hurricane's coming. So I think we have to understand that because of this surge, we do have to call an audible.
Let me paint for you one sort of nightmare scenario that I'm fearing, which is by the time that some of us get to the place in line where we're going to get a vaccine, that the vaccine available to me won't be able to deal with the strain that is circulating around this country. How likely could we be in that scenario, say, by the start of summer?
Well, I'm not sure that that's the scenario I'm most worried about. I think that the B117 or the UK strain is going to become the dominant strain. And fortunately, that one has not shown its ability to evade the protection from the vaccine. But its ability to cause many more infections and much more serious illness is there. So I think right now that's the priority I would look at. When you look at the data on the other variants, we're very concerned about the ones from South Africa and Brazil that may, in fact, lead to evasion of the immune protection from either natural disease or from vaccine. But even if you look at the vaccine trials in South Africa, for example, what was missed in the J&J trial, no one who had the variant infection who was vaccinated died. So it may actually attenuate the serious illness and not just fully prevent it. The other thing we have to do is just prepare people. We're all loosening up right now. We see the case numbers coming down. We all want to end our pandemic fatigue and our pandemic anger that don't believe the pandemic's even real. We got to turn that ship around too. We're really good in this country at pumping the brakes after we wrap the car around the tree. What we have to do now is also anticipate this and understand that we're going to have to change quickly. As fast as we're opening restaurants, we're likely to be closing them in the near term.
How blind do you feel right now to the various strains that might be circulating? I mean, I've seen some epidemiologists say that, we don't know what we don't know because we've done such a poor job of surveillance. I know there's some fears that, we think there's a South African strain, a Brazil strain. People are worried about a Chicago strain and a Los Angeles strain. How worried are you about what we don't know and can't see right now?
I'm very concerned about that. But I think the good news is that I actually see action being taken with this new administration, unlike we've seen before. And so there really are efforts right now to, in fact, get us that kind of surveillance system in place as quickly as possible. And frankly, we need the Congress to pass the President's Relief Act because that'll help us also do more of this kind of work. So and right now we're flying blind, but I'm more optimistic we're going to have the data. But as you've seen, these viruses have come up quickly, and they have actually caused us more and more surprises. And just expect the unexpected in the days ahead.
Wasn't that interview amazing? Mr. Osterholm is talking about a mutation, a variant of the virus that is coming over from the UK, that it's building. And over the next few months, in the spring of 2021, the United States can fully expect again, a revisitation of the pandemic in increased fashion. As a matter of fact, did you notice how he actually categorized it as a Cat 5 hurricane through the metaphor of that and applying it to a virus that is coming here to the United States in the next few months in a new wave, a mutation, a variant? Let me get back to the letter of Archbishop Vigano. Let me go back quoting. In the intentions of its architects, this crisis will serve to make the recourse of nations to the Great Reset irreversible, thereby giving the final blow to a world whose existence and very memory they want to completely cancel. Many people, as we well know, are annoyed by the references to the clash between good and evil and the use of the apocalyptic overtones, which according to them exacerbates spirits and sharpens divisions. And we see, do we not, my friends? Do we not see divisions in families? We see divisions today in relationships with people. We even see divisions in churches, of all things. There is a lot of tension between the differences of opinion of people today on things that are now being, what you could say, accepted as almost a new normal, where others are not and they are resisting. And it's causing differences. Divorce rates are up, have been over the last year. I've heard numbers that they've doubled. Yes, and arguments and division, as I say, between people have increased. But let me get back to the letter here from Archbishop Vigano. What is surprising, however, is that there is no one to sound the alarm. Until a few months ago, it was easy to smear as conspiracy theorists those who denounced these terrible plans, which we now see being carried out down to the smallest detail. In the religious sphere, this obstacle to evil is the church, and in particular, the papacy. In the political sphere, it is those who impede the establishment of the new world order. As is now clear, the one who occupies the chair of Peter has betrayed his role from the very beginning in order to defend and promote the globalists' ideology, supporting the agenda of the deep church, who chooses him from its ranks. Well, I guess there goes Archbishop Vigano's retirement. But that's another story. But I continue here. He concludes, Mr. President, you are well aware that in the crucial hour of the United States of America is considered, in this crucial hour, the United States of America is considered the defending wall against which the war declared by the advocates of globalism has unleashed. Place your trust in the Lord, strengthened by the words of the Apostle Paul, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. To be an instrument of divine providence is a great responsibility for which you will certainly receive all the graces of state that you need, since they are being fervently implored for you by many people who support you with their prayers. With this heavenly hope and the assurance of my prayer for you, for the First Lady, and for your collaborators, and with all my heart, I send you my blessings. God bless America. My friends, when you realize that this came from an archbishop of the Catholic Church, you got to admit, it's quite heavy, it's quite meaty. It's to the point, it doesn't pull any punches. It is right on in terms of observations that he has recognized from his educational background, and this is an elderly man, by the way, and his world travels. And he has observed and he sees the development and the ongoing progression of what he believes to be a very threatening environment, a very threatening storm that's on the horizon. As a matter of fact, the implication here is, though he didn't make the connection to the dot, but the dot is in the holy writings of God's Word, both in Daniel and in Revelation, that there is a beast on the move, and the world is in staging process of accommodating this emergence of what God calls Babylon, the mystery, the mother of harlots, a beast that is indeed representative of evil and is driven by demonic powers. And so it is here in this regard that Archbishop Vigano mentions and emphasizes the fact that as far as he's concerned, going back to October of 2020, he states, let me requote, Mr. President, you are well aware that in this crucial hour, the United States of America is considered the defending wall against which the war declared by the advocates of globalism has been unleashed. What he's saying is the United States of America is the default block. It is the obstacle. The church should be the obstacle on the theological side. But in the secular world, the geopolitical obstacle, as far as Archbishop Vigano is concerned, is indeed the United States. Well, the executive orders, as I said I would get back to, I don't know about you, but in light of this statement of Archbishop Vigano and the perception that he has that the United States of America is indeed the last firewall, it is the default barrier to stop, to be an obstacle, to prevent, slow down the emergence of this latter-day world-ruling government that God has labeled as a beast. In looking at it that way and in viewing it from his perspective, and now comparing some of the most recent executive orders, policies that are now beginning to form, that are redirecting the United States' geopolitical association with the community of nations in the world, frankly, my friends, brethren, I'm concerned. I'm concerned because one of those executive orders was the reattachment of the United States to the Paris Climate Accord or Agreement. That's right, the Paris Climate Agreement, a globalist program that deals with climate change and different pollutant limitations and so forth. And the details you can find out by just Googling what it is and take your time reading through it. But the fact of it is, we are now being re-engaged. We were brought out of it because it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But now we're being brought back into it, locked in, and once again attached to this globalist program or this globalist policy that is now been engaged. Secondly, another one, to reinstitute the restrictions on gas and oil and drilling on federal lands. And what this is obviously going to do is slow down our ability to produce oil and liquid gas. And sadly, the United States in 4 years grew to become the greatest producer of crude oil, my friends. That's right, we produce more oil than Russia and Saudi Arabia now, and are moving up on becoming the largest exporter of liquid gas. That's right. And now restrictions are going to be reinstituted to slow all that down and prevent drilling again and production again, in combination with another executive order that has killed the construction of the Keystone Pipeline that was being built out of Canada to go down into Texas to eliminate trucking this oil via trucks and so forth through a pipeline that was being built. An executive order has stopped all of that construction. Another executive order has stopped the construction on the border wall between Mexico and the United States, thereby increasing the risk of immigrants coming over the border, illegal, undocumented immigrants, along with some being criminal types, of being able to get back into the United States. Right now, even though there are some states fighting it, another executive order attempting to essentially stop deportation for 100 days has been now brought into the courts and is being fought by, I think, Texas and Arizona and so on. But the bottom line is another executive order to stop deportation, meaning retaining these illegal immigrants and continuing to supply, support, and facilitate their needs. Terrorist travel bans, restrictions from terrorist countries, Muslim terrorist countries, have now been lifted. Another executive order to allow that ban to afford now individuals to come into the United States from those countries and consequently be able to once more enter in without any restrictions on this. So what I'm saying is, what all this means is that the United States is being restrained. It's going to be restrained from producing what it's capable of doing and forced to entertain globalist objectives again. Re-engagement to the World Health Organization is also another executive order that was implemented to afford again the support of this particular institution. And the United States, being involved in this globalist movement, which is underscored by Marxism, is, in all due respect, very counterproductive to the programs and policies that seem to be working over the last 4 years. What's all this mean, though, biblically? What it means, again, my friends, is that if Archbishop Vigano's observations have any credibility, and the United States is indeed the last firewall, it's the last wall to prevent, slow down, play the role of an obstacle to a globalist agenda, and it gets compromised, then as I've said before, if indeed the United States goes globalist, the rest of the world will indeed follow, because that's just the way it is. There are no other forces on this planet at this time to prevent the emergence of what Revelation chapter 17 talks about. I want to turn your attention over there for a moment, because this is where the story is going. This is where a lot of the details are indeed going to be accomplished in the manifestation of this. And we read here in Revelation chapter 17, breaking into the context, verse about 11. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seven, goes into perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are in 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast, a small time. They pool, as I've often said, their assets together to support this tyrant. And this tyrant, you can read about him in the latter verses of Daniel chapter 8. You can read about him in the latter verses and the kingdom that he steers in chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, the latter part of Daniel 7 as well, the fourth beast. And it's not a pleasant description. It's not a pleasant story. The fact remains is that this force, this beast, this dictator and false prophet, of which will in combination link up eventually with this tyrant, is going to be very hard on Christians. As a matter of fact, in Daniel 7, it talks about how it is going to have its way with Christians, with God's people. It's going to prevail over the saints. It mentions that in Daniel chapter 7. As a matter of fact, here, as we begin to finish out here in 17, it says in verse 13 of chapter 17, "These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." It is a coalition of nations represented by 10 kings. How that plays out, how that manifests together, is still somewhat of a mystery to us in terms of how that is going to be profiled. But we do understand that as that begins to coalesce and begins to come together, you will know by virtue of your familiarity of knowing what we've just read and be able to identify with what is going on from God's point of view. My friends, brethren, that's important. Prophecy is important. It's 1/3 of your Bible. It's also a proof. Fulfilled prophecy is a proof of your Bible. You can't deny these things. Prophecy plays a part in our Christian walk, without a doubt. It helps us to see the bigger picture of what you and I are a part of, and helps us to understand the reality of which we share with our God even now in this physical world, at this physical material time of our existence in this mortal flesh that we're in. And that's important for us to self-actualize on that, so that the reality of our faith can come home and resonate with us and be real to us. Because, brethren, God, friends, God has given this information to us so that we might be encouraged in our faith as we go forward. Look at Revelation 13. Notice this. It's an old system that's coming back onto the grid here. This is an old system that's coming back on the grid. Chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. I stood upon the sand, the sea, and saw the beast that rose up out of the sea, having 7 heads. So this thing comes up out of the populations of the earth, out of the nations of the earth, out of the countries and out of the peoples of the earth. Verse 2, and the beast which I saw, and it talks about a leopard and a bear and a lion, and that connects right up to the beast. The same animals that are described there in Daniel chapter 7. This is in reverse style here, but nevertheless it's the same animals to give you the connection, to help you understand this is a Greco-Roman, Babylonish type of system that is going to overtake the world and begin to exercise and impose its authority and policies, laws and times on those, and will end up marking in some way, shape, or form to afford you that if indeed you want to operate within it, you want a job, you want to eat, you're going to have to receive this particular mark. And if you don't, you're going to be hunted. You're going to be hunted like an animal. You won't be able to work. You won't be able to eat. We read about that as well, as a matter of fact, in this chapter 13. But I don't want to go there. What I want to do is continue in verse 3 here of chapter 13 of book of Revelation. I saw one of his heads, and it was wounded. And that's my point. This is an old system. It's being resurrected. It's coming back out of history into the current, present time. And it says it was wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed. It comes back. It's healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. All the world wondered because it became so dominant. It was so beneficial. Many of the people became beneficiaries. And it became the great benefactor. You can read about how great it became and how powerful it was and how much the people loved it by reading Revelation 18. I know it's the demise of the beast, but you can read between the lines to see just how great, how rich, how wealthy, how much the people benefited from it, so much so that when it comes down, they cry. Oh, they cry over the loss of the system, which was evil, driven by Satan, the devil himself. As a matter of fact, we're told in the book of Revelation, it is not only demon influenced, it's demon possessed, because demons come out of the tyrant as well as the false prophet. It's an amazing story, my friends, and it's important that you recognize that government isn't always your best friend, and at some point for Christians, the government is going to be our enemy in some regards. Not in some regards, actually in a very serious regard. But here in Revelation, again going back to chapter 13, and in verse 11 we read, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. That's Satan the devil, spoke religiously, but nevertheless was driven by a demon. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And so this system comes back online and does indeed take its role, as pointed out in Daniel 7, to deceive the whole world. It impacts and has an effect on the whole world. It's an amazing story, a very, very sobering story in some regards as to how this all plays out. But nevertheless, when you begin to understand what the Bible describes here and look back on history, it's the nature of man. We see what's happening here is a big circle, frankly, because what went around is now coming back around. As I mentioned, this is an old system. We went from Babylon to Babylon. We end in Babylon. We started in Babylon, and we're going to end in Babylon. It's just one big consistent circle that we experience here in this effort, endeavor of man's desire to unify, to coalesce, to consolidate its assets and its power. And it reflects, quite frankly, it reflects the ultimate aim and objective and desire of Satan, the devil, who's behind all this, to bring into being this one world government or this new world order. So we need to be aware of some of these things, my friends, to prepare ourselves, to get ready. Because frankly, the storm is on us with technology and so many of the things that we see going on around us. And now, because of policy changes, what appears to be the beginning of compromises of America's policies to become more allowing, more compromising, more facilitating, more appeasing to the globalist agenda, it makes one wonder just where thou goest. Where are we going? And it obviously, with this being the description of the end of the story, we can begin to see and begin to understand through the observations by seeing the dots how the lines can begin to connect. So all I'm saying, my friends, is that we need to be prepared, and you need very much so to get right with God and have a relationship with Jesus Christ. In the world, my friends, you will have tribulation, without a doubt. But you know what? The good news? The good news is Jesus said, be of good cheer. Yes, be of good cheer. For I've overcome the world. And He, Jesus Christ, is promising you eternal life in His kingdom. And quite frankly, that's really what matters. That in itself is an awesome promise that you have if you'll just get right with God and accept Christ as your example and exemplify His values, His attributes, His standards that He stands for, reflect in your life if you'll do that, because Jesus Christ did indeed die for your sins. Well, my friends, time's run out on me, and I wanted to, before we leave, offer you a free offer that we have. It's called Can You Understand Bible Prophecy? You can download this booklet or email us at info@cgi.org, or you can go ahead and request it off our website at cgi.org. Again, you can email us and request it at info@cgi.org, and or you can actually even download it right now before I finish while I'm talking to you. You can go ahead and download it right off of our website at cgi.org. It's there for you to be able to do that. Or if you'd like to call us, and maybe you're not on the net and want to call us, you can call us between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Central Time, USA. That's 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. between those two times, Central Time, USA. And we'll get that free offer out to you. It's a small little booklet. You can probably read it in one sitting, but it will help you to understand certain principles that are used in helping you to understand what prophecy is all about and how it can be clarified for you a bit in utilizing the principles and the rules of understanding prophecy. So my friends, until next time, hey, stay safe, stay healthy, really, in these times, uncertain times that we have. I know it's been hard on many of us, and it doesn't look like a whole lot of light is at the end of the tunnel yet, but hang in there, be patient. Things will work out because they always do for the people of God. And so until next time, as I say, we never say goodbye on this. Until next time, we'll see you right back here on another session of Biblical News Updates and Commentary.